The wind screamed across the open plains, carrying sharp flakes of ice that cut like tiny knives. The sky had turned a dark, heavy gray, the kind that warned every living creature to find shelter fast. But Mary Thompson was still miles away from home. She pulled her wool shawl tighter around her shoulders as the storm grew stronger. The blizzard had arrived much sooner than anyone expected. Mary was a strong frontier woman, used to hard winters and long days of work. But even she felt fear stirring inside her as the wind pushed against her body, nearly knocking her off her feet. Snow swirled around her, making it almost impossible to see more than a few steps ahead. The land she knew so well now looked like a white, endless desert. She urged her old horse, Willow, to keep moving, but the animal stumbled with each step, tired and cold. Mary gently rubbed Willow's neck, whispering to her even though her own lips were numb. "Just a little farther," she said softly. But the truth was, she had no idea how far they still had to go. The storm had swallowed all familiar landmarks. The temperature dropped quickly. Mary felt the cold sliding through her gloves and boots, biting into her skin. She knew she had to keep moving. If she stopped, the cold would take her. She had heard stories of travelers frozen in their tracks, found days later standing like statues in the snow. She refused to become one of them. The wind howled louder, as if warning her to turn back. But there was no turning back. Home was the only place where she and Willow had any chance of surviving the night. Each minute felt longer than the last. Each breath filled her lungs with icy air that stung painfully. Mary looked around again, trying to find anything familiar, a tree, a rock, a fence, but everything was covered in white. The storm erased the world, leaving her alone in a spinning cloud of snow. She could feel panic creeping into her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. Panic would only slow her down. Suddenly, Willow stopped. The horse's ears went up, and she let out a low, uneasy sound. Mary frowned. She didn't see anything, but she trusted Willow's instincts. Animals often sense danger long before people did. "Easy, girl," she whispered, looking around. Carefully. Then she heard it. A faint cry. It was soft, almost hidden beneath the roar of the storm. Mary froze, wondering if the sound was only in her imagination. But then it came again, a weak, desperate cry carried by the wind. Her heart began to race. It sounded like a baby. Mary could hardly believe it. Who would bring a child out in a blizzard like this? She guided Willow toward the sound, pushing through the deep snow. The crying grew clearer. It was real. After several long minutes, she spotted something dark lying near a fallen tree. She climbed down from her horse and hurried forward, her boots sinking into the snow. When she reached the small bundle, her breath caught in her throat. It was a baby, tiny, wrapped in animal skin, its face red from the cold. The child was barely moving. Mary's hands shook as she lifted the baby into her arms. The infant let out a weak whimper, pressing its cold cheek against her chest. She looked around quickly, but saw no signs of anyone else. No tracks, no horses, no people. Just the storm. "What happened to you?" she whispered, though she knew the baby could not answer. She also knew something else. This child was Comanche. The markings on the blanket and the small beaded charm tied near the baby's wrist were unmistakable. Fear struck her for a moment. The Comanche were known to protect their own fiercely. What if they thought she had taken the baby? What if they were watching her even now? But another gust of icy wind hit her, and she pushed those thoughts away. A baby could not survive this blizzard alone. Whatever risks came later did not matter now. Mary tucked the child inside her coat, close to her heart, sharing what little warmth she had left. She climbed back onto Willow and turned toward where she hoped her home stood beyond. The storm. The blizzard raged on, but Mary's fear changed into determination. She would not let this child die, not while she still had breath in her lungs. She had no idea that this single act would bring 100 Comanche warriors to her door. Mary held the baby tightly against her chest as Willow pushed forward through the storm. Every few moments, she leaned her chin down to check if the child was still breathing. The tiny rise and fall against her coat gave her courage to continue. Still, the weight of what she had just done pressed heavily on her mind. Why was a Comanche baby alone in such a deadly storm? Where were the parents? Was there danger nearby? The questions circled in Mary's head like the swirling snow around her. But no matter how many answers she imagined, none made sense. One thing was certain: the child had been left to die. Whether by accident or tragedy, she didn't know. But she could not let that happen after nearly an hour of slow, painful progress. Through the blizzard, Willow's hooves finally touched the familiar rise of land near Mary's homestead. Relief washed over her. The outline of her small cabin appeared like a dark, welcoming shadow against the storm. She urged Willow forward and stopped at the wooden porch. Barely able to feel her own hands, Mary climbed down carefully, cradling the baby close. She pushed open the cabin door, letting a wave of warm air spill out. Inside, the fire she had left burning earlier still glowed. She hurried in and shut the door behind her, blocking out the storm's roar. At once, she removed the thick coat and laid the baby near the hearth on a soft blanket. The child's skin was pale, almost blue. The small hands curled weakly, and the eyes struggled to stay open. "There, little one," Mary whispered as she rubbed the baby's arms gently. "You're safe now, you're warm." She placed a pot of water above the fire and grabbed a cloth. Slowly, she warmed the infant's cold limbs, careful not to shock the child's fragile skin. The baby whimpered softly, a sign of life Mary desperately needed to hear. Tears of relief prickled her eyes. "You're a fighter," she murmured. As the minutes passed, some color returned to the baby's cheeks. The small chest rose more steadily. The tiny fingers relaxed. Mary sighed deeply, realizing she had been holding her breath almost the entire time. Once the infant was stable, she inspected the beaded charm tied around the baby's wrist. It was beautifully made, blue, red, and white beads forming the shape of a rising sun. Mary had seen such charms before. They were worn only by the children of Comanche families of high honor. Her heart tightened. This was not just any baby. Someone important was missing. A child. She looked toward the window, where snow whipped against the glass. She imagined figures hidden in the storm, watching her every move. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She was alone, miles from any settlement. If the Comanche believed she had stolen the baby, they might come in anger. And no one would hear her if she cried for help. But when she turned back to the small child sleeping near the fire, her fear softened again. The baby's tiny hand curled around the edge of the blanket, so innocent, so helpless. She knew she could not undo what she had done. She had made a choice, one she would make again if needed. Mary forced herself to focus. She prepared a mixture of warm milk and water and fed the baby using a clean cloth. The infant drank slowly at first, then more steadily. With every swallow, Mary felt the storm outside seem a little less threatening. Hours passed. The blizzard continued to rage, pounding against the cabin. But inside was a different world, quiet, warm, and filled with a strange new sense of responsibility. Mary watched over the child like a guardian, adjusting the blanket, feeding when needed, whispering comfort even though the baby could not understand her words. Yet her thoughts refused to settle. Who had left the child out there? Was it an attack? A raid gone wrong? Had the parents been lost to the storm? Every possibility seemed more tragic than the last. By nightfall, the baby finally slept peacefully. Mary sat in her rocking chair, the fire crackling beside her, Willow resting just outside the cabin. She stared into the flames, trying to calm her restless mind. She knew this storm would pass by morning. But what came after? Would the Comanche come looking? Would they find the tracks she left in the snow? Mary swallowed hard. She had saved a life, but she might have also stepped into a path she could not turn back from. Still, she felt no regret. Outside, the wind howled and screamed. Inside, the baby slept alive, warm and safe. Mary whispered, "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." She had no idea just how soon her courage would be tested. Morning arrived slowly, as if even the sun was afraid to push through the heavy clouds left behind by the blizzard. The world outside Mary's cabin lay buried under thick blankets of snow. Trees bent under the weight, fences disappeared, and the usual sounds of wildlife were silent. Everything seemed frozen in time. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled softly. Mary sat beside the hearth, watching the baby sleep. The child's breathing was steadier now, the cheeks warmer and the tiny hands no longer stiff from the cold. But every small sign of improvement filled Mary with a deep mixture of relief and fear. Saving the baby had been the only choice she could make, but now she understood the danger she had invited into her life. The Comanche were not known to ignore the loss of one of their own, especially a child. If they believed she had taken the baby by force, the consequences could be deadly. Her small cabin offered little protection against warriors skilled in battle. Still, when Mary looked at the sleeping infant, her resolve strengthened. She would not undo her choice. Compassion had guided her hands, and she stood by that dot as the baby stirred. Mary lifted the child gently, humming a soft tune she remembered from her own childhood. The baby relaxed in her arms. For a moment, the cabin felt peaceful, almost like it belonged to a small family rather than a woman alone in the wilderness. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. While feeding the baby, Mary suddenly heard a faint sound outside, an unsettling crunch in the snow. Her heart skipped. It was not the wind. It was not Willow. This was slow, careful, deliberate movement. Someone was out there. She froze, listening, her senses sharpened. Another sound closer this time. A chill ran down her spine. She placed the baby in a wooden cradle, wrapped in soft blankets, and reached for her rifle. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to steady them. She was not a violent person, but she knew how to defend herself when necessary. Mary moved to the small window and peeked out. At first, she saw nothing but endless white. Then, her eyes caught something, a dark shape near the tree line. It was still, watching. Her breath caught in her throat. Was it a person? A scout? Was it the one who left the baby? Or someone searching for the child? She stepped away from the window, pulse racing. Her mind raced through possibilities. If they were observing her, they might know by now that the baby was inside. She felt exposed, trapped between danger outside and responsibility inside. The baby let out a soft cry, breaking the tense silence. Mary hurried back, calming the child with gentle pats. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Little one, you're safe. I'm here." But even as she said the words, she wondered if she could truly keep the child safe. Hours passed. The dark figure disappeared, but Mary sensed she was not alone anymore. The snow outside held no tracks yet, but she knew the watcher could return at any moment. The storm had ended, and with clear skies came clear trails and clear paths for anyone searching. Mary fed the baby again, taking careful note of its strength. The child seemed alert, curious, and fragile. She studied the beaded charm again. The craftsmanship was too fine, too meaningful. This baby belonged to a respected family. Someone important would be missing them, and someone important would come. Mary walked outside briefly to gather more wood, her eyes scanning every corner of the land. Willow stood quietly, shaking snow from her mane. The world felt too calm, too still, like the moment before lightning cracks across the sky. When Mary stepped back into the cabin, she hesitated before closing the door. The weight of her choice settled on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She had saved a life, but in doing so, she might have placed herself directly in the path of danger, yet compassion was not a mistake. It was a risk she willingly accepted. She knelt beside the cradle again and touched the baby's tiny hand. The child wrapped its fingers around hers with surprising strength. The simple gesture pierced her heart. "You've been through so much," she whispered, "but you're safe now. I won't let harm come to you." Her voice was steady, but her thoughts were not. Out there in the snow-covered woods, someone knew the child survived. Someone had watched her cabin. And someone, maybe many, would come to reclaim what she now protected. Mary did not know when. But she knew this quiet moment would not last. A storm far greater than the blizzard was moving toward her doorstep. The next morning brought a weak, pale sunlight that stretched across the snow like thin gold threads. Mary opened her eyes slowly, feeling the weight of exhaustion in her bones. She had slept lightly, waking several times to check on the baby. Each soft breath from the child had become a small miracle, fragile but real. The cabin was warm from the glowing fire, but the world outside remained silent and cold. Mary rose quietly and looked toward the cradle. The baby lay awake, staring up with wide dark eyes that reflected the firelight. There was something striking in those eyes, an ancient calmness, as if the child understood more than it should. Mary offered a soft smile. "Good morning, little one," she whispered, though her voice held a tired tremble. She lifted the baby carefully, feeling a warmth inside her she hadn't felt in years. Since losing her own child long ago, she had buried every maternal instinct deep within her heart. But this tiny stranger had awakened something she thought had died, a quiet tenderness she had been afraid to feel again. She fed the baby with slow, careful movements, humming a gentle tune. The infant's small mouth latched onto the cloth, eagerly drinking with determination. Each swallow filled Mary with relief. Strength was returning to the child. When the baby finished, Mary cradled the little one against her shoulder and slowly rocked side to side. Outside, the world stood frozen, but inside the cabin, warmth grew between them like a secret flame. For a brief moment, the danger seemed distant, but Mary knew better. After settling the baby into the cradle, she stepped to the window. The sun revealed the thick snow piled across the land, but it also showed something she had hoped not to see: tracks. Faint, but unmistakable. Someone had approached during the night. Her breath caught. She scanned the trees, searching for movement, but everything appeared still. Whoever had watched her had left before sunrise, or hid somewhere out of sight. Mary swallowed hard. She didn't have much time before curiosity turned into action. Still, she couldn't let fear paralyze her. She returned to the baby, determined to keep life inside the cabin steady and calm. She cleaned the child with warm water, wiped the tiny fingers and toes, and wrapped the infant in a fresh blanket she had sewn years ago. The blanket was soft, lined with little embroidered stars. She had made it for her own child before fate stole him away. Now, it sheltered another life, a life that did not belong to her. Mary paused, noticing how natural the movements felt, how easily she had slipped back into the rhythm of nurturing. The baby gazed up at her with trust so pure it made her heart ache. "You deserve a chance," she whispered, "and I'll see that you get one." Hours passed as Mary worked. She prepared broth, chopped wood, and mended small tears in the baby's clothing. She kept the fire steady, knowing warmth meant survival. But every few minutes, her eyes drifted back to the cradle. Each time she saw the baby resting peacefully, she felt courage rise within her. Yet courage could not erase her growing worry. The Comanche would not abandon their search. They knew every trail, every shadow in these lands. If they were tracking her, they would find her not in days, but hours. While chopping a block of wood outside, Mary paused and lifted her head. The air felt different, thicker, heavier. A strange silence hung over the land, the kind that made her skin prickle. She sensed eyes upon her again, though she saw nothing. She hurried back inside, securing the door behind her. The baby cooed softly from the cradle. Mary knelt beside the child, brushing a gentle hand over its forehead. "We must be brave," she said quietly, more to herself than to the child. "Whatever comes." She checked the rifle, ensured her horse had food, and barricaded the window shutters. Every movement reminded her that she was preparing not just for survival, but for confrontation. But even as fear clawed at her thoughts, she felt no regret. She would choose compassion again and again, even if it cost her dearly. As evening approached, a faint change stirred in the distant air. A low rumble, not thunder, not wind. Something heavier, rhythmic. Hoofbeats. Many of them. Mary's heart pounded in her chest. She stepped toward the door, but stopped short, gripping the wooden frame. To steady herself, they were coming. Not one, not a few, dozens. The Comanche had found her. She glanced at the cradle, where the baby slept peacefully, unaware of the storm approaching. Mary breathed deeply, steadying her voice. "It's all right, little one," she whispered. "I'm here, and I won't let harm touch you." But even as she spoke the words, she felt the earth tremble beneath her feet. The true test of her courage was about to begin. The ground trembled beneath Mary's boots long before she saw anything outside her cabin. At first, she thought it was her imagination, just the echo of her own fear pounding in her chest. But then the vibration grew stronger, steadier, like a heartbeat pulsing through the snow-covered earth. Hoofbeats, many, riding hard. Mary's breath hitched. She moved to the window, but the shutters blocked most of the view. She hesitated, then pushed one shutter open just an inch, enough to see the distant horizon. A dark line moved across the white world. Riders. Dozens of them. She quickly shut the window again and backed away, her pulse racing. Her cabin was small, fragile, and alone. There were no neighbors for miles, no one to call for help. If the warriors believed she had harmed the child, she stood no chance. For a moment, her courage wavered, but then the baby stirred in the cradle, letting out a small, soft sound. Mary turned, her fear melting into resolve. The child she had rescued depended on her. Compassion had led her into this storm of danger, and she would not abandon the path now. She lifted the baby, holding the warm little bundle close as the distant hoofbeats grew louder. The rhythm echoed through her cabin walls, steady, powerful, unavoidable. The Comanche were coming. Mary laid the baby back down gently and moved through the cabin with urgency. She checked the rifle again, though she prayed she wouldn't need it. She made sure the fire remained alive and strong. She pulled a thick quilt over the cradle, leaving only enough space for the infant to breathe comfortably. Outside, the thunder of hooves grew deafening. Mary whispered to herself, "Stay calm. Think clearly. You've faced danger before, but never like this." A sudden silence fell over the land. Not the soft quiet of snow, but the heavy stillness of many people stopping at once. Mary stepped toward the door, her heart hammering in her ears. Then came the voices, low, sharp, and foreign to her ears. She knew enough Comanche to understand. The tones, they were calling for someone. Or something. They were searching. Mary swallowed hard. She forced herself to peek through the small gap between the doorframe and the wood. What she saw made her blood turn cold. Warriors. More than she had ever imagined. Their horses stood in a wide semicircle around her cabin. The warriors were wrapped in fur-lined cloaks, their faces painted in bold symbols. Bows, spears, and lances glinted under the pale winter sun. Their dark hair whipped in the breeze as they scanned the land with sharp, unforgiving eyes. She counted as many as she could, but she stopped at 50. There were more behind them, shifting, moving. One 100 was not an exaggeration. They were truly here, and they were here for the baby. Mary stepped back, trembling. She felt the cabin walls closing around her, not in threat, but in protection. She had no intention of running. Running would be seen as guilt. She had done nothing but save a life. She exhaled shakily. "They deserve the truth," she whispered. "All I can give them is honesty." Outside, a single warrior rode forward. He was older than the others, with long braids and a stern expression. He raised his hand, signaling for silence, and the entire group obeyed instantly. Another voice shouted, a younger warrior. His tone was thick with emotion. Mary didn't understand the words, but she recognized grief when she heard it. He was calling for the child. Mary's chest tightened. She felt the ache of a mother's loss in that cry. Whether he was the father, brother, or uncle, she did not know, but she knew the sound of a heart broken by fear. She thought of the bundle she had found half buried in snow, of the weak cry nearly swallowed by the storm, of the baby's tiny hand gripping hers with desperate trust. Her decision had been right, but that didn't make the danger smaller. Suddenly, a loud knock struck her door, sharp and forceful, but not violent. It was a demand. Mary flinched. Knock came again, followed by a voice, deep, commanding, calling out words she did not understand, but the tone was clear. "Show yourself." Mary looked at the cradle. The baby blinked up at her, innocent and unaware of the world beyond the wooden walls. She inhaled deeply. Courage, she reminded herself, is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. She wrapped the baby securely in a blanket, holding the infant close. The weight felt both fragile and powerful in her arms. The warriors outside waited, their patience thinning like ice under the sun. Mary lifted her chin. "If they've come for you," she whispered to the child, "they will see the truth from my own hands." The knocking came once more, strong, urgent. Mary stepped toward the door, ready to face whatever waited beyond it. The time for hiding had ended. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The door shook again under a firm hand, but still Mary did not open it. Not yet. She needed a moment to steady herself, to gather every thread of courage she had left. Outside, 100 warriors waited, silent, watchful, powerful. The air itself felt tense, as if the earth held its breath. Mary lifted the baby, making sure the blanket was secure around the little body. The infant stirred slightly, but did not cry. That small silence gave her strength. She brushed a trembling hand across the child's forehead. "You survived the storm," she whispered softly. "Now we must survive this." She stepped toward the door, heart pounding. Her fingers hovered over the wooden latch. For a moment, fear tightened like a rope around her chest. But she forced herself to breathe slowly. She had nothing to hide, only the truth to show. With a deep exhale, she lifted the latch and pulled the door open. A blast of cold air rushed inside. Snow swirled, and in front of her stood the elder warrior, the same man she had glimpsed earlier through the window. He sat tall on his horse, face stern and unreadable, his dark eyes sharp as flint. Behind him, the semicircle of warriors tightened, forming a living wall of power and emotion. Many faces carried grief. Many carried suspicion. Some carried fury. Mary felt all of it pressing toward her like a wave. The elder warrior leaned forward slightly, scanning her, then scanning the baby in her arms. His eyes widened the smallest bit, not in anger, but in recognition. The beaded charm around the child's wrist glimmered in the sunlight, and the man's gaze fixed on it. A murmur spread through the ranks of warriors. They knew this baby. They knew exactly who the child belonged to. The younger warrior who had cried out earlier pushed his horse through the crowd. He was younger, with fierce eyes, his painted face streaked with worry. He stopped only a few steps from Mary, staring at the baby with an expression torn between hope and heartbreak. Mary swallowed hard. She stepped out onto the snow-covered porch, her boots sinking slightly, but her grip on the infant remained steady. "I found the child in the blizzard," she said, her voice soft but clear. Alone, nearly frozen. The men did not understand her words, but they understood her tone, her posture, and the way she held the baby. The younger warrior dismounted quickly. He approached slowly, as if afraid the child would vanish if he moved too fast. His hands shook as he reached out, but then he stopped, unsure, glancing at the elder for permission. The elder nodded once. Mary hesitated only a moment before gently holding out the baby. The young warrior accepted the child with trembling arms. The moment his skin touched the infant's warm cheek, he let out a breath that sounded like a sob held back for too long. He pressed his forehead against the baby's small head, whispering, in his own language, words filled with love and relief. A wave of emotion moved through the warriors. Bows lowered, shoulders softened, and the air grew lighter around them. Mary watched quietly, her heart aching at the sight. She felt the deep love in the young man's trembling hands, the way he held the child as if afraid to ever let go again. After a long moment, the elder warrior dismounted slowly and approached Mary. Snow crunched beneath his boots. He stood tall, his expression unreadable. Mary stood her ground, though she felt tiny under his gaze. He placed a hand over his chest, nodding once, a gesture of respect, gratitude, and peace. Mary felt tears sting her eyes. She nodded in return, unsure what to say, unsure if words even mattered. The elder spoke softly in Comanche, his tone warm and steady. Though Mary didn't understand the language, she understood the heart behind it. He pointed to the baby, then to Mary, then placed his hand over his own heart again. She saved one of theirs. She saved someone precious. The warriors began speaking. Among themselves, voices calmer now, some even warm. The young warrior who held the baby looked up and met Mary's eyes. He stepped forward and gently touched her hand, a simple, powerful thank you. Then he wrapped the baby in his cloak and held the child close, hope returning to his features like dawn breaking after a long night. Mary felt a sudden weakness in her legs, not from fear, but from relief so strong it nearly knocked her down. The Comanche had come to her door, but not for revenge. Not for blood. They had come for family. They had come for the child she saved. And now, seeing the truth, they offered her something rare on the frontier. Honor. Respect. Peace. But this encounter was not the end of Mary's story. It was only the beginning of something far greater. For several long moments, the world seemed to stand still in front of Mary's cabin. The warriors remained gathered in a wide circle, their breath rising in soft clouds into the cold morning air. The young Comanche man, clearly someone deeply connected to the rescued child, held the baby with overwhelming tenderness. His painted face softened, his shoulders eased, and his eyes glistened with the weight of emotions, barely held together. But relief was not the only feeling growing in the snowy air. Suspicion lingered like a shadow. The warriors' weapons were lowered, but not entirely forgotten. Dozens of sharp eyes still watched Mary closely, studying her, questioning her intentions, wondering how a white woman had ended up with the sacred child of their people. Though no blade was aimed at her, the silent tension wrapped around her like a metal chain. Mary felt it too. She stepped back slightly, her hands raised not in fear, but to show she meant no harm. Her voice trembled when she spoke, but her words carried truth in every breath. "I did what anyone with a heart would do," she whispered. The child was alone, helpless, dying. The warriors did not understand her language, but they understood the sincerity in her eyes. Still, the knowledge that one of their own had been found in the care of a foreign woman was not something easily accepted. Every mother, father, brother, and uncle in that group needed certainty. They needed trust. And trust was earned slowly on the frontier. The elder warrior approached Mary again. Snowflakes clung to the edges of his braids, and his fur cloak billowed softly in the cold wind. He studied her for a long time, neither blinking nor speaking. His presence alone held the gravity of a leader, a man whose voice shaped decisions for many. He gestured toward the cabin door, wanting to see where she had kept the child. Mary understood. She stepped aside and opened the door wider, inviting him into her home. It was an act of courage, perhaps the boldest she had ever taken. Inviting a Comanche elder inside her cabin was a risk, but refusing him would only deepen their doubts. The elder nodded once and entered. Inside, he observed everything with slow, thoughtful movements. He glanced at the warm fire, the boiled cloths, the cradle, the leftover milk mixture still sitting near the hearth. He touched nothing, yet noticed everything at last. He picked up the tiny embroidered blanket Mary had wrapped around the baby. He turned it over in his hands, seeing the small hand-sewn stars stitched into the corners. His expression shifted, something softened in his eyes, something almost gentle. He knew she had cared for the child. He stepped back outside and spoke to the waiting warriors in low, powerful tones. His words rolled across the snowy land like a steady wind. Mary didn't understand the language, but she understood the effect. The warriors listened with deep attention. Their tense posture eased, their anger dimmed, their suspicion weakened. Truth was spreading through their ranks. The young father or brother, whoever he truly was, held the baby closer as the elder spoke. When the speech ended, the young man stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Mary. He placed his hand over his heart, then extended it toward her, a gesture of gratitude, a gesture of respect, a gesture of peace. That Mary felt her throat tighten. She mimicked the gesture, pressing a trembling hand to her chest. The young man nodded, a warm light in his once hardened expression, but suddenly, from among the crowd, another man pushed forward, a warrior with a fierce, scorching stare. His face was marked with symbols of mourning. He spoke sharply to the elder, pointing toward Mary, his voice thick with grief and accusation. Mary's heart sank that this man did not believe her. This man saw an enemy, not a savior. Several warriors murmured in agreement. The circle tightened again. Tension flooded the air once more, sharp enough to feel against the skin. The elder raised a hand, commanding silence. But the grieving warrior refused to be silent. He stepped closer, shouting words Mary couldn't understand, but she felt the meaning. He had lost someone. He blamed her for it. He wanted justice. Mary swallowed hard. She stepped forward, placing herself directly between the warrior and the young man holding the baby. The cold air stung her face, but her voice was steady. "I saved the child," she said, pressing her hand to her heart. "I meant no harm." The warrior glared at her, breathing hard. Mary held his gaze, refusing to look away. Something shifted in the air, an invisible line drawn, a moment where fear and truth collided. The elder moved between them, speaking firmly to the angry man. The young father joined him, showing the baby and pointing toward Mary's cabin. Their words built a bridge. Slowly, very slowly, the fierce expression softened. Not into friendliness, but into acceptance. The grieving man lowered his head. The tension broke. Mary felt her knees weaken in relief. She had stood before 100 warriors, faced their grief, their anger, their doubts, and the truth had survived. Yet, this was not the end. Respect had been earned, but fate had much more to reveal.